Martin Hewitt, Investigator, by Arthur Morrison. 4. The Case of the Dixon Torpedo. Hewitt was very apt, in conversation, to dwell upon many curious chances and coincidences that he had observed, not only in connection with his own cases, but also in matters dealt with by the official police, with whom he was on terms of pretty regular and indeed friendly acquaintanceship. He has told me many an anecdote of singular happenings to Scotland Yard officials with whom he has exchanged experiences. Of Inspector Nettings, for instance, who spent many weary months in search for a man wanted by the American government, and in the end found, by the merest accident of misdirected call, that the man had been lodging next door to himself the whole time. Just as ignorant, of course, as was the inspector himself as to the enemy at the other side of the party wall. Also of another inspector, whose name I can't recall, who, having been given rather meager and insufficient details of a man whom he anticipated having great difficulty in finding, went straight down the stairs of the office where he had received instructions, and actually fell over the man near the door, where he had stooped down to tie a shoelace. There were cases, too, in which, when a great and notorious crime had been committed and various persons had been arrested on suspicion, some were found among them who had long been badly wanted for some other crime altogether. Many criminals had met their deserts by venturing out of their own particular line of crime into another. Often a man who got in trouble over one thing comparatively small found himself in for startlingly larger trouble, the result of some previous misdeed that otherwise would have gone unpunished. The rabble note forger Mirsky might never have been handed over to the Russian authorities had he confined his genius to forgery alone. It was generally supposed at the time of his extradition that he had communicated with the Russian embassy with a view to giving himself up, a foolish proceeding on his part, it would seem, since his whereabouts, indeed, even his identity as a forger, had not been suspected. He had communicated with the Russian embassy, it is true, but for a quite different purpose, as Martin Hewitt well understood at the time. What that purpose was is now, for the first time, being published. The time was 1:30 in the afternoon, and Hewitt sat in his inner office examining and comparing the handwriting of 2 letters by the aid of a large lens. He put down the lens and glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece with the premonition of lunch. As he did so, his clerk quietly entered the room with one of those printed slips which were kept on the announcement of unknown visitors. It was filed up in a hasty and almost illegible hand, thus: Name of visitor, F. Graham Dixon. Address, Chancery Lane. Business, private and urgent. "Show Mr. Dixon," said Martin Hewitt. Mr. Dixon was a gaunt, worn-looking man of 50 or so, all rather carelessly dressed, and carrying in his strong though drawn face and dullish eyes a look that characterizes a lifelong strenuous brain worker. He leaned forward anxiously in the chair which Hewitt offered him, and told his story with a great deal of a very natural agitation. "You may have possibly heard, Mr. Hewitt. I know there are rumors of the new locomotive Torpedo which the government is adopting. It is, in fact, the Dixon Torpedo, my own invention, and in every respect, not merely in my own opinion, but in that of the government experts, by far the most efficient and certain yet produced. It will travel at least 400 yards, farther than any torpedo now made, with a perfect accuracy of aim, a very great decertium, let me tell you, and will carry an unprecedentedly large charge. There are other advantages, speed, simple discharge, and so forth, that I needn't bother you about. The machine is the result of many years of work and disappointment, and its design has been only largely arrived by a careful balancing of principles and means, which are expressed on only 4 existing sets of drawings. The whole thing, I need hardly tell you, is a profound secret, and you may judge of my present state of mind when I tell you that one of the sets of drawings has been stolen. From your house? From my office in Chancery Lane, this morning. The 4 sets of drawings were disbanded thus. Two were at the Admiralty office, one being finished sets on a thick paper, and the other a set of tracings thereof. The other 2 were at my own office, one being penciled sets, uncolored, a sort of finished draft, you understand, and the other a set of tracings similar to those of the Admiralty. It is this last set that is gone. The 2 sets were kept together in one drawer in my room. Both were there at 10 this morning, of that I am sure, for I had to go to that very drawer for something else when I first arrived. But at 12, the tracings were gone. You suspect somebody, probably. I cannot. It is the most extraordinary thing. Nobody has left the office except myself, and then only to come to see you, since 10 this morning, and there has been no visitor, and yet the drawings are gone. But have you searched the place? Of course I have. It was 12 o'clock when I first discovered my loss, and I have been turning the place upside down ever since then. I and my assistants. Every drawer has been emptied, every desk and the table turned over, the very carpet and the linoleum have been taken up, and there's not a sign of the drawings. My men even insisted on turning out their pockets inside out, although I never for a moment suspected either of them. And it would have been a pretty big pockets to hold the drawings, doubled up as small as they might be. You say your men, there are 2 I understand, had neither left the office. Neither, and they are both staying in now. Worsfold suggested that it would be more satisfactory if they did not leave until something was done towards clearing up the mystery. And although, as I have said, I don't suspect either of them, I acquiesced. Just so, now, I am assuming that you wish me to undertake the recovery of these drawings. The engineer nodded hastily. Very good. I will go round to your office, but perhaps you can tell me something about your assistants. Something it might be awkward to tell me in their presence. You know, Mr. Worsfield, for example. He is my draughtsman, a very excellent and intelligent man, a very smart man indeed, and I feel sure quite beyond suspicion. He has prepared many important drawings for me. He has been with me nearly 10 years now, and I have always found him trustworthy, but of course the temptation in this case would be enormous. Still, I cannot suspect Worsfold. Indeed, how can I suspect anybody in the circumstances? The other now? His name's Ritter. He is merely a tracer, not a fully skilled draughtsman. He is quite a decent young fellow, and I have had him 2 years. I don't consider him particularly smart, or he could have learned a little more of the business by this time. But I don't see the last reason to suspect him. As I said before, I can't reasonably suspect anybody. Very well, we'll get to Chancery Lane now, if you please, and you can tell me more on the way as we go. I have a cab waiting. What else can I tell you? I understand the position to be succinctly this. The drawings were in the office when you arrived. Nobody came out, and nobody went in, and yet they vanished. Is that so? That is so. When I say that absolutely nobody came in, of course I accept the postman. He brought a couple of letters during the morning. I mean that absolutely nobody came in past the barrier in the outer office. The usual thing, you know, like a counter with a frame of ground glass around it. I quite understand that, but I think you said that the drawings were in the drawer in your own room, not the outer office, where the draughtsmen are, I presume. That is the case. It is an inner room, or rather, a room parallel to the other and communicating with it. Just as you left your own room, we will have just left. But then, you say you never left your office, and yet the drawings vanished. Apparently by some unseen agency while you were there, in the room. Let me explain more clearly. The cab was bowling smoothly along the stand, and the engineer took out a pocketbook and pencil. I fear, he proceeded, that I am a little confused by my explanation. I am naturally rather agitated. As you will see presently, my offices consist of 3 rooms, 2 at one side of a corridor and the other opposite, like this. I made a rapid pencil sketch. In the outer office, my men usually work. In the office, I work myself. These rooms communicate, as you see, by a door. Our ordinary way in and out of the place is by the door to the outer office leading into the corridor, and we first pass through the usual lifting flap of the barrier. The door leading from the inner office to the corridor is always kept locked from the inside, and I don't suppose I unlock it once in 3 months. The drawer in which the missing drawings were kept, in which I saw them at 10 o'clock this morning, is at the place marked D, in a large chest of shallow drawers, in which the plans will lie flat. I quite understand. Then there's this private room opposite. What of that? That is a sort of private sitting room that we rarely use, except for business interviews and of private nature. When I said I never left my office, I did not mean that I never stirred out of my inner office. I about one room or another, both the outer and inner offices. And once I went to the private room for 5 minutes, but nobody came in either in or out of any of the rooms at that time, for the door to the private room was wide open and I was standing at the bookcase. I had gone to consult a book, just inside the door with a full view of the doors opposite. Indeed, Worsfold was at the door of the outer office most of the short time. He came to ask me a question. And Hewitt, he replied. It all comes to a simple first statement. Know that nobody left the place and nobody arrived. Except for the postman, who couldn't get near the drawings, and yet the drawings went. Is this your office? The cab had stopped before a large stone building. Mr. Dixon alighted and led the way to the first floor. Hewitt took a casual glance around each of the 3 rooms. There was a sort of door in the frame of the ground glass over the barrier to admit the speech of visitors. This door Hewitt pushed wide open and left so. He and the engineer went into the inner office. Would you like to ask Mr. Worsfold and Ritter any questions? Mr. Dixon inquired. Presently. Those are their coats, I take it, hanging just to the right of the outer office door, over the umbrella stand. Yes, there are those things, coats, hats, sticks, and umbrella. And those coats were searched, you say? Yes. And this is the drawer thoroughly searched, of course. Oh, certainly. Every drawer was taken out and turned over. Oh, of course, I must assume you made no mistake in your hunt. Now tell me, anybody know where these plans were beyond yourself and the 2 men? As far as I can tell, not a soul. You don't keep an office boy? No, there would be nothing for him to do except post a letter now and again, which Ritter does quite well for board. Are you sure that the drawings were there at 10 o'clock? Perhaps the thing scarcely matters. But I may as well know if your men have keys to the office. Neither. I have patent locks to each door, and I keep the keys myself. If Worsfold and Ritter arrive before me in the morning, they have to wait to be let in, and I am always present myself when the rooms are cleaned. I have not neglected precautions, you see. No, I suppose the object of the theft, assuming that it is a theft, is pretty plain. The thief would offer the drawings for sale to some foreign government? Of course. They would probably command a great sum. I've been looking, as I need hardly tell you, to the invention of securing me a very large fortune, and I shall be ruined, indeed, if the design is taken abroad. and I'm under the strictest engagements of secrecy to the Admiralty, and not only should I lose all my labor, I should lose all my confidence reposed in the back of the headquarters, should in fact the subject be penalties for breach of contract and my career is stopped forever. I cannot tell what a serious business is this for me. If you cannot help me, the consequences will be terrible. Bad for the service of the country, too, of course. Oh, of course. Now tell me this. It would, I take it, be necessary for the thief to exhibit these drawings to anybody anxious to buy the secret. I mean, he couldn't describe the invention by word of mouth. Oh, no, that would be impossible. The drawings are of the most complicated description, full of figures upon which the whole thing depends. Indeed, one would have to be a skilled expert properly to appreciate the design at all. Various principles of hydrostatics, chemistry, electricity, and the pneumatics are almost delicately manipulated and adjusted, and the smallest error or omission in any part would upset the whole. No, the drawings are necessary to the thing, and they are gone. At this moment, the door of the outer office was heard to open, and somebody entered. The door between the two offices was ajar, and Hewitt could see right through the glass door left open to the barrier, into the small space beyond. A well-dressed, dark, bushy-bearded man stood there carrying a handbag, which he placed on the ledge before him. Hewitt raised his hand to enjoy silence. The man spoke in a rather high-pitched voice, and with him a slight accent. "Is Mr. Dixon now within?" he asked. "He is engaged," answered one of the draughtsmen. "Very particularly engaged. I'm afraid you won't be able to see him this afternoon. Can I give him any message?" "This is the second time I've come today. Not 2 hours ago, Mr. Dixon himself tells me to call again. I have a very important, very excellent steam packing to show him, and this is cheap and the best in the market." The man tapped his bag. "I just have taken orders from the largest railway companies. I cannot see him. For 1 second only. I will not detain him." "Really, I'm sure you can't this afternoon. He isn't seeing anybody. But if you will leave your name." "My name is Hunter. And what the good of that? He can call me a little later as I come, and now he is engaged. It is very great pity." And he snatched up his bag and walking stick and stalked off indignantly. Hewitt stood still, gazing through the small aperture in the doorway. You'd scarcely expect a man with such a name as Hunter to talk with an accent, would you? He observed amusingly. It isn't a French accent, nor a German, but it sounds foreign. You don't happen to know him? "No, I don't. He called here about 12:30, just while we were in the middle of our search, and I was frantic over the loss of the drawings. I was in the outer office myself and told him to call later. I have lots of such agents here, anxious to sell all sorts of engineering appliances. But what will you do now? Shall we see my men?" "I think," Hewitt said, rising, "I think you'll get to question them yourself." "Myself?" "Yes, I have reason. Will you trust me with the key of your private room opposite? I'll go over there for a little, while you talk to your men in this room. Bring them in here and shut the door. I can look after the office from across the corridor, you know. Ask them each to detail his exact movements about the office this morning, and get them to recall each visitor who has been here from the beginning of the week. I'll let you know the reason for this later. Come across to me in a few minutes." Hewitt took the key and passed through the outer office into the corridor. 10 minutes later, Mr. Dixon, having questioned his draughtsman, followed him. He found Hewitt standing before the table in the private room, on which lay several drawings on tracing paper. "See here, Mr. Dixon," said Hewitt. "I think these are the drawings you're anxious about." The engineer sprang toward him with a cry of delight. "Why, yes, he exclaimed, turning them over. "Every one of them, but where? How? They must have been here all the time, then. What a fool I've been!" Hewitt shook his head. "I'm afraid you're not quite so lucky as you think, Mr. Dixon," he said. "These drawings have certainly been out of the house for a little while. Never mind how, we'll talk about that later. There is no time to lose. Tell me, how long would it take a good draughtsman to copy them?" It couldn't possibly be traced over properly in less than 2 or 2.5 long days. Very hard work, Dixon replied with eagerness. Then it is as I feared. These tracings have been photographed, Mr. Dixon, and our task is one of very possible difficulty. They have been copied in an extraordinary way. One might hope to get a hold of the copy, but photography upsets everything. Copies can be multiplied with such amazing facility that, once the thief gets a decent start, it is almost hopeless to checkmate him. The only chance to get at the negatives before the copies are taken. I must act at once, and I fear, between ourselves, it may be necessary for me to step very distinctly over the line of the law in this matter. You see, to get at those negatives may involve something very like housebreaking. There must be no delay, no waiting for legal procedure, or the mischief is done. Indeed, I very much question whether you have any legal remedy, strictly speaking. Mr. Hewitt, I implore you, do what you can. I need not say that all I have is at your disposal. I will guarantee to hold you harmless if anything that happens. But do, I entreat you, do anything possible. Think of what the consequences may be. Yes, well, so I do, Hewitt remarked with a smile. The consequences to me, if I were charged with housebreaking, might be something that no amount of guarantee could mitigate. However, I will do what I can, if only from patriotic motives. Now I must see your tracer, Ritter. He is the traitor in the camp. Ritter? But how? Never mind that now. You are upset and agitated, and had better not know more than necessary for a little while, in case you say or do something unguarded. With Ritter, I must take a deep course. What I don't know, I must appear to know, and that will seem more likely to him if I disclaim acquaintance with what I do know. But first, put these tracings safely away out of sight. Dixon slipped them behind the bookcase. Now, Mr. Hewitt pursued, call Mr. Westford and give him something to do that will keep him away from the inner office across the way, and tell him to send Ritter over. Mr. Dixon called his chief draughtsman and requested him to put in order the drawings in the drawers in the inner room that had been disarranged by the search, and to send Ritter, as Hewitt had suggested. Ritter walked over to the private room with an air of respectful attention. He was a puffy-faced, unhealthy-looking young man, with very small eyes and a loose, mobile mouth. Sit down, Mr. Ritter, Hewitt said in a stern voice. The recent transactions with your friend, Mr. Hunter, are well known to both Mr. Dixon and myself. Ritter, who had at first leaned back easily in his chair, started forward at this and paled. You're surprised, I observe, but you should be more careful in your movements out of doors if you do not wish your acquaintances to be known. Mr. Hunter, I believe, has these drawings which Mr. Dixon has lost, and if so, I am certain that you have given them to him. That, you know, is theft, for which the law provides a severe penalty. Ritter broke down completely and turned appealingly to Mr. Dixon. Oh, sir, he pleaded, it can't be so bad, I assure you. I was tempted, I confess. I hid the drawings, but they're still in the office, and I can give them to you. Really, I can. Indeed, Hewitt went on. Then in that case, perhaps you'd better get them at once. Just so, go and fetch them. We won't trouble to observe your hiding place. I'll only keep this door open, to be sure you don't lose your way, you know. Down the stairs, for instance. The wretched Ritter, his hanging head, slunk into the opposite office. Presently he reappeared, looking, if possible, ghastlier than before. He looked irresolutely down the corridor, as if meditating it or for a run, but Hewitt stepped forward and motioned him back into the private room. You mustn't try any more of that sort of humbug, Hewitt said, with a increased severity. The drawings are gone, and you have taken them. You know that well enough. Now attend to me. If you received your deserts, Mr. Dixon would send for a policeman this moment, and have you hauled off to the jail that is your proper place. But unfortunately, your accomplice, who calls himself Hunter, who has no other names beside that, as I happen to know, has the drawings, and it is absolutely necessary that these should be recovered. I'm afraid that it will be necessary, therefore, to come to some arrangement with this scoundrel, to square him, in fact. Now, just take that pen and paper and write to your confidant as I dictate. You know, the alternative if you cause any difficulty. Ritter reached tremblingly for the pen. Address him in your usual way, Hewitt proceeded. Say this. There has been an alteration in the plans. Have you got that? There has been an alteration in the plans. I shall be alone here at 6 o'clock. Please come without fail. Have you got it? Very well, sign it, and address the envelope. You must come here, and then we may arrange matters. In the meantime, you will remain in the inner office opposite. The note was written, and Martin Hewitt, without glancing at the address, thrust it into his pocket. When Ritter was safely in the inner office, however, he withdrew it and read the address. I see, he observed. He uses the same name, Hunter. 27, Little Carton Street, Westminster, is the address, and there I shall go once with this note. If the man comes here, I think you had better lock him up with Ritter and send for the policeman. It may be at least frighten him a little. My object is, of course, to get the man away, and then, if possible, to invade his house, in some way or another, and steal or smash his negatives if they are there to be found. Stay here, in any case, till I return, and don't forget to lock up those tracings. It was about 6 o'clock when Hewitt returned, alone, but with a smiling face that told of good fortune at the night. First, Mr. Dixon, he said as he drooped into an easy chair in the private room, let me ease your mind by the information that I have been most extraordinarily lucky. In fact, I think you have no further cause for anxiety. Here are the negatives. They were not all quite dry when I, stole them, I suppose I must say, so that they have stuck together a bit, and probably the film is damaged. But you don't mind that, I suppose? He laid a small parcel wrapped in newspaper on the table. The engineer hastily tore away the paper and took up 5 or 6 glass photographic negatives of a half-plate size, which were damp, stuck together by the gelatin films in couples. He held them, one after another, up to the light of the window and glanced through them. Then, with a great sigh of relief, he placed them on the hearth and pounded them to dust and fragments with a poker. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Dixon, flinging himself into a chair, said, Mr. Hewitt, I can't express my obligation to you. What would have happened if you had failed, I prefer not to think of. But what shall we do with Ritter now? The other man hasn't been here yet, and by the way... No, the fact is I didn't deliver the letter. The worthy gentleman saved me a world of trouble by taking himself out of the way, Hewitt laughed. I'm afraid that he has got himself rather into a mess by trying 2 kinds of theft at once, and you may not be sorry to hear that his attempt on your torpedo plans is likely to bring him a dose of penal servitude for something else. I'll tell you what has happened. Little Carton Street, Westminster, I found to be a seedy sort of place. One of those old streets that have been much better days. Many good people seem to live in each house. They are fairly large houses, by the way. And there is quite a company of bell handles on each doorpost, all down the side, like organ stops. The barber had possession of the ground floor of number 27 for trade purposes, so to him I went. Can you tell me, I said, where the house I can find Mr. Hunter? He looked doubtful, so I went on. As friend will do, you know, I can't think of his name. Foreign gentleman, dark, with a bushy beard. The barber understood at once. Oh, that's Mursky, I suspect, he said. Now, come to think of it, he has had letters addressed to Hunter once or twice. I've took him in. Top 4, back. This was good so far. I'd got at Mr. Hunter's other alias. So, by the way of possessing him with the idea that I knew all about him, I determined to ask him as Miskey. before handing over the letter addressed to him as Hunter. A little bluff of that sort is invaluable at the right time. At the top floor back, I stopped at the door and tried to open it at once, but it was locked. I could hear somebody scuttling about within, as though carrying things about, and I knocked again. In a little while, the door opened about a foot, and there stood Mr. Hunter, or Misky, as you like, the man who, in the character of a traveler in steam packing, came here twice today. He was in shirt sleeves and cuddled something under his arm, hastily covering with a spotted pocket handkerchief. "I've called to see M. Mirsky," I said, "with a confidential letter." "Oh, yes," he answered hastily. I know. Excuse me one moment." And he rushed off downstairs with his parcel. Here was a noble chance. For a moment I thought of following him, in case there might be anything interesting in that parcel. But I had to decide in a moment, and I decided to try slipping in the room. I slipped inside the door, and finding the key on the inside, locked it. It was a confused sort of room, with a little iron bedside in one corner, and a sort of rough-boarded enclosure in another. This I rightly conjectured to be the photographic darkroom, and made for it at once. There was plenty of light within when the door was left open, and I made at once for the drying rack that was fastened over the sink. There were a number of negatives in it, and I began hastily examining them one after another. In the middle of this, our friend Mirsky returned and tried the door. He rattled violently at the handle and pushed. Then he called. At this moment I had come upon the first of the negatives you have just finished smashing. The fixing and the washing had evidently only been completed lately, and the negative was drying on the rack. I seized it, of course, and the others were stood by it. "Who are you inside there?" Mirsky shouted indignantly from the landing. "Why do you go in my room like that? Open this door at once, or I will call the police." I took no notice. I had the full number of negatives, one for each drawing, but I was not by any means sure that he had not taken the extra set, so I went hunting down the rack. There were no more, so I set to work to turn out all the undeveloped plates. It was quite possible, you see, that the other set, if it existed, had not yet been developed. Mirsky changed his tune after a little more banging and shouting. I could hear him kneeling down to try the keyhole. I had left the key in there, so he could see nothing. But he began softly talking rapidly through the hole in a foreign language. I did not know it in the least, but I believe it was Russian. I could not at the time imagine, though. I have a notion now. I went on ruining his stock of plates. I found several boxes, apparently of new plates, but there was no means of telling whether they were really used or merely underdeveloped. But in the chemical impress of your drawings on them, I dragged every one ruthlessly from its hiding place and laid it on the full glare of the sunlight, destroying it. Of course, whether it was unused or not. Mirsky left off talking, and I heard him quietly sneaking off. Perhaps his coincidence was sufficiently clear to warrant an appeal to the police, but it seemed to me rather probable at the time that was what he was going for. So I hurried on with my work. I found 3 dark slides, the parts that carry the plates, on the back of the camera, one of them fixed in the camera itself. I opened these and exposed the plates to ruination as before. I suppose nobody ever did so much devastation to a photographic studio in 10 minutes as I had managed. I had spoiled every plate I could find, and the developed negative safely in my pocket when I happened to glance at the porcelain washing well under the sink. There was one negative in that, and I took it up. It was not a negative of a drawing of yours, but of a Russian 20-ruble note. This was a discovery. The only possible reason any man could have for photographing a banknote was the manufacture of an etched plate for the production of forged copies. I was almost as pleased as I had been when I discovered your negatives. He might bring the police now as soon as he liked. I could turn the tables on him completely. I began to hunt about for anything else relating to this negative. I found an inking roller, some old plates, some pieces of blankets used for printing front plates, and on the corner of the floor, heaped over with newspapers and rubbish, a small orange copying press. There was also a dish of acid, but not an etched plate or printed notes to be seen. I was looking at the press with the negative in one hand and an inking roller in the other when I became conscious of a shadow across the window. I looked up quickly, and there was Mirsky, hanging from some ledge or projection to the side of the window, and staring straight at me with a look of unmistakable terror and apprehension. The face vanished immediately. I had to move the table to get at the window, and by the time I had opened it, there was no sign or sound of the resident tenant of the room. I had no doubts of this reason for carrying the parcel downstairs. He probably mistook me for another visitor he was expecting, and knowing he must take his visitor into his room, he threw the papers and the rubbish over the press, and put up his plates and papers in a bundle and secreted them downstairs, lest his occupation should be observed. Plainly, my duty now was to communicate with the police. So, by the help of my friend the barber downstairs, a messenger was found and a note sent over to Scotland Yard. I waited, of course, for the arrival of the police, and occupied the interval by taking another look around, finding nothing important, however. When the official detectives arrived, he recognized the case as an importance. The large number of forged Russian notes have been put on circulation on the continent recently. It seems, and it was suspected, that they all came from London. The Russian government had been sending urgent messages to the police here on the subject. Of course, I said nothing about your business, and while I was talking to Scotland Yard man, a letter was left by a messenger addressed to Mirsky. The letter will be examined, of course, by the proper authorities, but I was not a little interested to perceive that the envelope bore the Russian imperial arms above the words Russian Embassy. Now, why should Mirsky communicate with a Russian embassy? Certainly not to let the officials know that he was carrying on a very extensive and lucrative business in the manufacture of spurious Russian notes. I think it was rather more than possible that he wrote, probably before he got your drawings, to say that he could sell information of the highest importance, and that this letter was a reply. Furthermore, I quite think that possibly when I asked for him by his Russian name, he spoke of a confidential letter, he at once concluded that I had come from the embassy in answer of his letter. That would account for his addressing me in Russian through the keyhole, and, of course, an official from the Russian embassy would be the very last person in the world whom he would like to observe the indications of his little etching experiments. But anyhow, be that as it may, Hewitt continued, your drawings are now safe, and it is once Mirsky is caught, and I think it likely, for a man of his shirt sleeves, with scarcely any plans and perhaps no money about him, hasn't a great deal of chance to get away. If he is caught, I say, he will probably get something handsome at St. Petersburg in the way of imprisonment, or Siberia, or whatnot, so that you will be amply avenged. Yes, but I don't understand how this business of the drawings even now. How in the world were they taken out of the place? And how in the world did you find it out? Nothing could be simpler, and yet the plan was rather ingenious. I'll tell you all exactly how the thing revealed itself to me. From the original description of the case, many people would consider that an impossibility had been performed. Nobody had gone out and nobody had come in, and that the drawings had been taken away. But impossibility is an impossibility after all, and as drawings don't run away by themselves, someone plainly had taken them, unaccountable as it may seem. Now, as they were in your inner office, the only people who could have got them beside yourself were your assistants. So at least that is pretty clear. One of them had something to do with the business. He told me that Worshold was an excellent and intelligent draftsman. Well, if such a man has that meditated treachery, he would probably be able to carry away the design in his head. At any rate, a little at a time, and would be able to, under no necessary risk, of stealing a set of drawings. But Ritter, you remarked, was an inferior sort of man. Not particularly smart, I think were your words. Only a mechanical sort of tracer. He would be unlikely to be able to carry in his head the complicated details of such a plan as yours, and, being in a subordinate position, and continuously overlooked, he would find it impossible to make copies of the plans in the office. So that, to begin with, I thought I saw the most probable path to start on. When I looked around the rooms, I pushed open the glass door to the barrier and left the door to the inner office ajar, in order to be able to see anything that might happen in any part of the place, without accidentally expecting indefinite development. While we were talking, as it happened, our friend Mirsky, or Hunter, if you please, came into the outer office, and my attention was instantly called to him by the first thing he did. Did you notice anything in particular yourself? No, really, I can't say I did. He seemed to behave much like a traveler agent might. Well, what I noticed was the fact that as soon as he entered the place, he put his walking stick into the camera stand, over there by the door, where it's close to where he stood. Most unusual thing for a casual caller to do, before even knowing whether you were in. This made me watch him rather closely. I perceived with increased interest that the stick was exactly the same kind and pattern as one already standing there. Also a curious thing. I kept my eyes carefully on those sticks, and was all the more interested and edified to see where he left, that he took another stick, not the one he came in with from the stand, and carried it away, leaving his own behind. I might have followed him, but I decided that it would be more learned by staying, as, in fact, proved to be the case. This, by and by, is the stick he carried away with him. I took the liberty of fetching it from Westminster, because I conceive it to be Ritter's property. Hewitt produced the stick. It was an ordinary thick Malacca cane, with a buckhorn handle and a silver band. Hewitt bent it over his knee, and laid it on the table. Yes, Dixon answered. That is Ritter's stick. I think I've seen it often in the stand, but what in the world? One moment, I'll fetch the stick Mirsky left behind. And Hewitt stepped across the corridor. He returned with another stick, apparently an exact facsimile of the other, and placed it by the side of the other. When your assistants went to the anteroom, I carried the stick off for a moment or two. I knew it was not Worshold because there was an umbrella there with an initial and a sandal. Look at this. Martin Hewitt gave the handle a twist and rapidly unscrewed it from the top. Then it was seen that the stick was a mere tube of very thin metal, painted to appear like the Malacca cane. It was plain at once that this is no Malacca cane. It wouldn't bend. Beside it you found your tracings, rolled up tightly. You can get a marvelous quantity of thin tracing paper into a small compass by rolling tight. And this was the way they were brought back, the engineer exclaimed. I see that clearly. But how did they get away? And that is mysterious as ever. Not a bit of it. See here. Mirsky gets a hold of Ritter, and they agree to get your drawings and photograph them. Ritter is set to get his Confederates to have these drawings, and Mirsky is to bring them back as soon as possible, so that they shan't be missed for a moment. Ritter habitually carries his Malacca cane, and the cunning of Mirsky at once suggests the tube should be made an outward facsimile. This morning, Mirsky keeps the actual stick, and Ritter comes to the office with the tube. He seizes the first opportunity, probably when you were in the private room, and Worshold was talking to you in the corridors, to get the tracings. Roll them up tightly and put them in the tube, putting the tube back into the umbrella stand. At 12:30, or whenever it was, Mirsky turns up for the first time with the actual stick and exchanges them, just as he afterwards did when he brought the drawings back. Yes, but Mirsky came half an hour after they were... Ah, yes, I see. What a fool I was. I was forgetting. Of course, when I was first missing the tracings, they were in his walking stick, safe enough. And I was tearing my hair out within arm's reach of them. Precisely. And Mirsky took them away before your very eyes. I expect Ritter was in a rare funk when he found the drawings were missing. He calculated, no doubt, that your not wanting them to be for an hour or two would be the out of the office. How lucky that is it struck me to jot down a pencil note on one of them. Might easily have made a note somewhere else, and then I should never have known that they were been away. Yes, they didn't give me any too much to miss them. Well, I think the rest's pretty clear. I brought the tracings in here, unscrewed the sham stack, and put it back. You identified the tracings and found none were missing. Then, of course, that was pretty clear, though it looked difficult. I knew you were to be naturally indignant with Ritters, as to I wanted to manage him myself. I told you nothing of what he had actually done, for fear that, in your agitated state, you might burst out with something that would spoil my game. To Ritter, I pretended to know nothing of the return of the drawings, or how they had been stolen, and only things that I did know for certainty. But I did pretend to know all about Mirsky, or Hunter, when, as a matter of fact, I knew nothing at all, except that he probably went under more than one name. Then Ritter put into my hands completely. When he found the game was up, he began with a lying confession, believing that the tracings were still in the stick, and that he knew nothing of their return. He said that they had not been away, and that he would fetch them, as I had expected he would. I let him go for them alone, and when he returned, utterly broken up in the discovery that they were not there, I had him altogether at my mercy. You see, if he had known that the drawings were all the time behind your bookcase, he might have brazened out and sworn the drawings had been there all the time, or we could have done nothing with him. We couldn't have sufficiently frightened him by a threat of prosecution for theft, because there were things in our possession to his knowledge. As it was, he answered the helm capitally, gave us Mirsky's address on this envelope, and wrote the letter that was to have got him out while I committed the burglary, if that disgraceful expedient had not been rendered unnecessary. On the whole, the case has gone very well. It has gone marvelously well, thanks you. But what shall I do with Ritter? Here's your stick. Knock him downstairs with it if you like. I should keep the tube, if I were you, as a memento. I don't suppose the respectable Mirsky will ever call to ask for it. But I should certainly kick Ritter out of the doors, or out the window if you like, without delay. Mirsky was caught, and after 2 reprimands at the police court was extradited on the charge of forging Russian notes. It came out that he had written to the embassy, as Hewitt had surmised, stating that he has a certain valuable information to offer, and the letter that Hewitt had seen delivered was the acknowledgment, and a request for more definite particulars. This was what gave rise to the impression that Mirsky had himself informed the Russian authorities of his forgeries. His first real intent was very different, but was never guessed. I wonder, Hewitt had said once or twice, observed, whether, after all, it would not have paid the Russian authorities better on the whole if I had never investigated Mirsky's little note forgery. The Dixon Torpedo was worth a good 20 ruble notes.